Six Flags is the greatest theme park company in the world.
So as I mentioned before, I grew up going to Disneyland, and that's definitely the park I went to most as a kid. Even more so than the Adventure Dome, even though I'm from Las Vegas. Primarily because the Adventure Dome gives my mom a headache. But in 2004, a family friend invited us on a coaster enthusiast trip to Knott's Berry Farm and Magic Mountain. And I think this was the trip that really turned me into the thrill ride junkie that I am. I rode Montezuma's Revenge, Boomerang, and Ghost Rider at Knott's Berry Farm, and had a blast on all of those. As I mentioned before, Montezuma's Revenge was my first looping roller coaster. And then came Magic Mountain. This park was unlike anything my little 7-year-old brain had ever seen before. Well, except for on Roller Coaster Tycoon. So many roller coasters. And I wasn't tall enough for about half of them. But what was the first ride I went on that fateful day? Oh, just a little ride called X. I walked up to this ride not knowing what to expect. I just saw that it was huge and its track layout seemed to make no sense. But I rode the damn thing, and I honestly don't know how that ride didn't scar me for life, because holy like I said, I wasn't tall enough for a bunch of rides, and then a bunch of other rides were closed. Like, I remember Deja Vu was closed, and Cyclone was closed. Dodged a bullet there. And I think Z-Force was even still there at that point, and that was SBNO. But I did get to ride Colossus and Goliath, as well as their Demon Drop style ride. Which is great because there's not a lot of drop towers like that left. And I also remember doing a couple of the flat rides in the Gotham City area that are still there, and Revolution and Ninja, of course. I was gonna ride Superman, but the line was obnoxiously long and I didn't think it would be worth it. And 7-year-old me was right. But more on that in a minute. That was the one and only time I went to Magic Mountain as a kid. We almost went back in 2009, but we ended up going to Knott's instead. And on that trip, I got to ride Accelerator and Silver Bullet, my ride on Silver Bullet being the first B&M I ever rode, because Goliath doesn't count. And of course, by 2010, we had moved to Florida, at which point B&M coasters were basically the primary big thrill coaster I got to go on. Dragon Challenge, Hulk, Manta, Kraken, eventually Mako, and of course, SheiKra, Kumba, and Montu. So yeah, I love big thrilling roller coasters, even if they're not entirely well themed. I mainly just care that they look good in the park that they're in. Fast forward to when I started working at Disney, and I realized that Galaxy's Edge at Disneyland wasn't causing the place to become an absolute war zone. I pulled the trigger and booked a trip to California. My first ever solo trip anywhere. Of course, I wasn't really by myself, because I had my good friend Dave, and my grandparents like an hour away in San Diego, who came to visit me and go have lunch with me at Mrs. Knott's later that week. But as I was planning this trip, I stupidly thought, hey, you know what would be a great thing to do on my second day in California? Go spend a whole day at Magic Mountain. And I knew that Dave had a pass because Magic Mountain is one of the parks he's going to cover in the Blitz California whenever that comes out. So he agreed that we would go on that first Tuesday that I was there. I actually bought a Six Flags annual pass because I thought that if I used it twice, it would pay for itself. And I was right. I was thinking that I'd try to go to Six Flags Over Georgia at some point in 2020. That obviously did not happen. And by the time I planned my March trip, I was also planning on going in June to Six Flags Great Adventure, Hershey Park, Kennywood, and Cedar Point, but obviously that didn't happen either. So I'm definitely trying to go to Cedar Point and probably Kings Island this year, but as far as going to Jersey and Pennsylvania, hopefully 2022? I don't know. I definitely want to ride El Toro and Jersey Devil and Nitro. Oh, and I guess Kingda Ka. Anyways, Dave picked me up at my hotel, which was actually the first time we met in person, and off we went. And since my Twitter meme review of all the coasters got deleted, I'm going to go through my in-depth thoughts on them here in the order that I rode them. First of all, walking into the park, once you get there from the parking lot, which is a bit of a hike, and going through the front gate that really needs an upgrade, you get to the main plaza. Wow, what a great first impression. It's not like the park has a central icon, but this is one of the cool picturesque money shots you get. Revolution front and center, full throttle off to the side, Tatsu behind it. It just looks nice. X2 wasn't open yet, so we went to full throttle first. And as many people say, it's a short ride, but it's friggin' awesome. That loop is amazing. Yeah, sure, it does pretty much feel like someone lost the second half of the ride, but hey, the Skyrocket 2 isn't a very long ride either, and I still love that. And yeah, the brakes on the drop are a buzzkill, but it's still a good ride. And unlike rides like Tigris and West Coast Racers, Full Throttle doesn't have the stupid comfort collars. This was just a classic, man. It's not intense, but it's still a really good ride. It makes excellent use of the terrain. Just a fun, vintage Schwarzkopf coaster. And I'm really glad they didn't try to ruin it by putting, I don't know, VR headsets on it or something. That'd just be stupid. It was finally time to ride X2. Since the last time I'd ridden it, it had gotten some major upgrades, including a soundtrack that didn't work on any of my rides on it, so that's a bummer. I think especially the soundtrack for the lift hill, the fact that they picked Enter Sandman to be what you're hearing as you're hauled up to the top of this 200-foot tall monstrosity of a ride is so awesome and badass and scary, and it sets the tone for the ride perfectly, and it's a shame that it wasn't working. It was also given new, lighter trains and a better paint job. Because seriously, what the hell is this? They also modified it so that it could run 3 trains, but did they ever run 3 trains? Of course not. They never even ran 2. And on most rides in the park, that wouldn't matter, since it wasn't a busy day either time I went. But when a ride has slow operations like X2 does, you really want to be using that separate unload. But hey, at least the loggers they require are literally pointless. I also want to know why, in this weird cul-de-sac that X2 sits in, is the nearest bathroom really far away? You really just want people throwing up in the bushes, Six Flags? Anyways, the ride is exactly how I remembered it. Disorienting, intense, and on the rough side. Honestly, I think the biggest problem is the restraint system. Obviously, I get the need to secure people as much as possible, but did you have to do it with a hard plastic restraint? I think if the seats were redone to be similar to a B&M Flyer, which can still accommodate all different body types through its soft foam rubber vest restraint, it would solve 99% of the ride's problems. But looking past all that, the ride is quite the feat of engineering, and only a guy like Alan Schilke could dream up something this insane. It's an awesome ride. Definitely not everyone's cup of tea, but if you like insane, intense, and unique rides, you should definitely give it a shot. How do you make a ride this tall and this fast be this mediocre? 7-year-old me was right. This ride may have been a record breaker, but my god, what a lackluster roller coaster. The theming in the queue is pretty cool, and the build up to the ride is absolutely pitch perfect. I actually really love that the whole thing happens behind closed doors and you can't see anything. It really heightens the suspense. But then you actually get on it, and the launch is forceless as crap. The only really good moment you get is that airtime when you stall out at the top before dropping. But even that's undercut by the restraints and the fact that you're facing the wrong direction to get the full force of that airtime.
Look, we're weightless, me and my coaster riding banana.
Wow, the airtime on this ride is phenomenal. Let's turn the train around so you don't get any of it. Also, let's replace the lap bars with over-the-shoulder restraints while we're at it. You know, because we're evil and people shouldn't be allowed to have nice things. Honestly, the drop ride they put on that tower years later is an infinitely better ride, and even then I didn't feel like the drop was particularly forceful. I guess I've been spoiled by having Tower of Terror and Falcon's Fury within driving distance of me for years now. This is an unconventional ride with a lift hill at the end, but it's a really awesome example of a classic suspended coaster and a great terrain coaster. I hope that the park keeps Ninja running for as long as they can, because it's a fun ride. We're closed for technical difficulties, please try again later. Walking up to this huge B&M looper, it looks freaking amazing. And then you realize that the trains are stand-up trains. If you've never been on a stand-up coaster, imagine riding a bike where most of your weight is placed on the bike seat and your feet are on the floor. And you're restrained in place there. It's not very fun. Not a fan. If you've ever wanted to know what it'd be like if Big Thunder Mountain developed a mean crystal meth addiction, then Gold Rusher is the ride for you. Okay, all jokes aside, it's a standard mine train, so it was fun and had some decent scenery. Not really anything else to say about it. Wait a minute, this ride has a height requirement of 48 inches? What the fuck? This is the 5th B&M invert coaster I've ever gotten on, and it of course is a clone of the original from Six Flags Great America. It's a good ride, and it's easy to see why this is such a popular model, but all of the other inverts I've been on are newer, bigger, and better. Still, if you like B&M inverts, it's definitely worth checking out. We're closed for technical difficulties, please try again later. It's about damn time. Honestly, this is like 40% of the reason why I even wanted to go to Magic Mountain. I had been dying to get on an RMC ever since they debuted New Texas Giant in 2011, and kept opening hit after hit after hit, including rides like Lightning Rod and Steel Vengeance. Living in Florida this whole time, it sucked to see all these other coasters popping up around the country, while Gwazi just sat there rotting. Thankfully, they finally rectified that, and we'll finally actually get to ride it this year, probably. Ironically, for a park that frequently tries to go for the records, with the original Colossus being the tallest and fastest wooden coaster ever built at the time, a record that would of course be taken by the Beast at Kings Island 2 years later, Twisted Colossus doesn't take any height or speed records, and it only has 2 inversions. But I'm fine with that because while this coaster does have a signature gimmick, and we'll come back to that later, it's still a great ride without it. And that's a damn good thing because they've given up on trying to duel it at all. It's still a long ride with almost 5,000 feet of track, and it's just a freaking blast. All around a great ride with lots of airtime, some sweet inversions, including some hang time on that 0G stall. It's easily the best ride in the park. Okay, you could argue whether X2 or Twisted Colossus is better, but I know which ride I'd rather marathon. Because I basically rode it 4 times back to back that first trip, and I couldn't even do X 2 times in a row. How do you make a ride this tall and this fast be this mediocre? Wait a minute. I remember thinking this ride was amazing back when I first rode it, primarily because of its massive height and drop into an underground tunnel. I never experienced anything like it. That is until I rode Desperado at Buffalo Bills in Prim, Nevada. That was like Goliath, but significantly worse.
I think everyone in the world knows by now that I don't ride the things anymore, and I've ridden enough of them in my time to know what they do, and I've just given up going on these that are this big.
What, you actually want me to ride my own roller coaster? Hell no, that thing's sketchy as crap.
That was really stupid.
Anyways, it wasn't until Mako opened at SeaWorld Orlando that I knew what a good hypercoaster was like. Mako is friggin' amazing. It's got a huge, steep drop at the beginning, strong airtime moments, and a great layout. So I knew that coming back to Goliath over 15 years later was bound to be disappointing. And I was right. What a waste of a ride. After a huge but not very steep drop, it's only like 60 degrees, you climb back up into this massive, boring turnaround, do another shallow drop, get a halfway decent pop of air, and then climb up into the infamous mid-course brake run. Obviously, the mid-course has to be there, because the rest of the ride would be downright dangerous, both for the riders and most likely the stress on the trains and the track if taken at full speed, but therein lies the problem. Most hypercoasters have an out and back layout for a reason. They save any twister elements for the end of the ride. Okay, Raging Bull, but Raging Bull is basically just B&M's take on the Hyper Twister concept. They never built another one, and that still doesn't grind to a screeching halt like Goliath does. Tall and fast roller coasters need to be allowed to be tall and fast and have big elements. Not grind to a screeching halt 3 elements in and waste all of that momentum and speed you just built up on that massive drop. Also, I know this is a dead horse to make fun of Six Flags reusing names, but honestly, I get it. It's way easier to reuse an existing trademark and logo. But if you're gonna reuse a name over and over again, could you at least make sure the rides are kind of consistent? You named a Batman clone Goliath, for crying out loud. What's wrong with you, Six Flags? It's so weird how I keep forgetting about Tatsu, because at any other park it would be the star attraction. But when there's so many other coasters at Magic Mountain and Tatsu is often not operating for technical issues, yeah, it can kind of get lost in the shuffle. And that's crazy, because Tatsu is a freaking incredible, surreal ride. I've been on Manta more times than I can count, and Tatsu is similar with one key difference. You go up super high, and pretty much never touch the ground. Except for the bottom of the pretzel loop, which tries to squash you into oblivion. This, Ninja, and Gold Rusher are the rides that put the mountain in Magic Mountain to its fullest potential. It is amazing. You're gliding high above the trees, high above the park entryway. It's so cool. I had debated whether I even wanted to ride Viper or not based on what I had heard about it. And I mean, look at it. I actually thought for the longest time that this was the ride that they had filmed Final Destination 3 on. Only recently did I realize it was actually filmed on Coaster at Playland. Canadian tax breaks. What are you gonna do? I finally decided that I'd ride it because I'd be really sad if I didn't ride it and it ended up closing a few months later. So I got on it and yeah, I can see why it has the reputation it does. I get where the cult fan base is coming from, and I also get why the general public doesn't really like it. It's huge, fast, and forceful. But the track profiling doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I mean, you have this huge, amazing drop, and then you pull up into a ramp, at the top of which happens to be a loop. Like, really? You couldn't figure out how to design a bigger loop? Oh, you could, but you needed Alan Schilke. Man, I can't wait to go to Dollywood. Anyways, I feel like if this was at one of my home parks, like Busch Gardens or SeaWorld, it would really grow on me. But as it stands, yeah, I'm not the biggest fan. Especially when I can drive an hour away from my house and go ride something like Kumba at Busch Gardens Tampa. Something like Viper just can't hold my attention in a park with so many other great rides that I rarely ever get to go on because that's on the opposite coast from where I live. And after an additional ride on X2, Dave and I were officially done with Magic Mountain for the day. We went to go get In-N-Out Burger afterwards, and in retrospect, I kind of feel bad that I essentially drained Dave right before his work week started, because I rode all of the coasters that I just mentioned. Dave tapped out after Batman, which means he didn't get to do Twisted Colossus, he didn't do Full Throttle for a second time, he definitely didn't do Tatsu or Viper, or X2 for a second time, of course not. It was, without a doubt, the most exhausting park day I've ever had. And that includes the following Friday where I went to Knott's Berry Farm from park opening until Scary Farm ended that night. And because of that, I honestly wasn't thinking I would go back to Magic Mountain when I first started planning to go back to California in March of 2020. That is, until my Twitter friend Ava Moss asked if I wanted to take a tour of the Disney lot in Burbank and the animation building, and of course I wanted to do that. And you know what's not far from Burbank? Valencia, California. And I guess also Universal Hollywood and the Warner Brothers lot. But anyways, suddenly Magic Mountain was back on the table, which I was ultimately happy about because I never did get on Scream, and I really wanted to ride West Coast Racers in Apocalypse. So after having a cup of Walt Disney's chili, and also a stop at Wendy's to get a Junior Bacon Cheeseburger, we were back at Magic Mountain for a second time.
As a side note, that thing must be a bitch to lug from county to county every summer. Oh, it's Magic Mountain. That makes perfect sense. Holy shit, the I-5 is flooded! It's the apocalypse! Ah!
Wait a second, I'm standing in the ocean. This isn't right. Of course, this time we only had a few hours, so we only got on a small handful of rides, but I'm definitely glad that we went back because it allowed me to form a more solid opinion of the park. Full Throttle was still the first ride I did because, obviously, it's right there in the front of the park, but after that we went straight to Twisted Colossus and Scream, at which point I finally got to ride Twisted Colossus with Dave, which was nice, and I rode Scream by myself. I freaking hate this ride. Garbage name, garbage theme, garbage location, garbage landscaping. The layout isn't bad, but in a park with so many other coasters, it's just one big meh. Why is it here? What purpose does it serve, other than just being token floorless coaster? It's a clone of Bizarro at Six Flags Great Adventure, so it doesn't take any records, and it's just built on a parking lot. This ride is almost every negative stereotype I've heard about Six Flags rolled into one. It doesn't look good, it's just built on a parking lot, it's got a dumb name, and it's also kind of rough. And what's really evil about Scream is that it actively prevents them from making Riddler's Revenge better by giving it floorless trains like so many other stand-up coasters that have been converted. So yeah, I hate this ride. When I saw Coaster Studios' review of Apocalypse, I got really excited to ride it, and I was not disappointed. This is a really fun coaster. It was especially nice because I hadn't been able to get on Ghost Rider earlier that week because it had been closed for maintenance. And I will say that the theming is a bit of an odd touch, especially in retrospect, because it was originally themed to Terminator Salvation, but they got rid of that theme and just made it about a general apocalypse, I guess. Something about nuclear war? I don't know, but then people were having anxiety about nuclear war, so they figured, oh, well, we'll change it to something a little more out there, like pandemic. Great timing, guys.
Wow, it's really weird that Six Flags just went and straight up rethemed this ride to the coronavirus.
I hate you, past me. The ride has some of the best theming in the park, but the theming is still not what makes this a good ride. What makes this a good ride is just that it's a really solid wooden coaster. With the insanely comfy seats, the distinctive wooden coaster rattle, the out-of-control feeling. I love a good wooden roller coaster, and this is definitely a really good wooden roller coaster. Not quite as good as Ghost Rider, but still a lot of fun. So, for some reason, Magic Mountain decided, in their infinite wisdom, that instead of finding a way to make it so the Twisted Colossus would duel every time, like, I don't know, running it like any other park would run it, with multiple trains, consistent dispatches, and having lockers outside of the attraction, they decided, screw it, let's just build another one. Well, that's not entirely accurate. It's also the exact same type of ride as Full Throttle, making them the only park in the world to have 2 Mobius Loop dueling coasters, and probably also the only park to have 2 custom Premier Ride Skyrocket coasters. But considering the fact that this park had 2 4th Dimension coasters at one point, and still has, like, what, 3 kiddie coasters? Magic Mountain just isn't worried about redundancy. Granted, this is a very different ride from Full Throttle. And it's interesting to me that Magic Mountain marketed this as a launch coaster, when absolutely nobody is going to ride this and come off raving about the launches. That's like raving about Slinky Dog Dash's launches, guys. Or Superman's launch, for that matter. No, this ride isn't about the launches. The launches just make it so that the coaster can duel every single time. And that's great. Also great, just the ride in general. This is an extremely fun coaster. Much like Twisted Colossus, it's got a great mix of ride forces and elements. Magic Mountain needs some more mid-level thrill rides like this, so I think that's a huge win. After this, we were short on time, but I definitely did want to do Tatsu again, and I'm glad I did, because Tatsu is still freaking incredible. And in my infinite wisdom, I decided I really wanted to go on X2.
X2, are you going to stand by the side or ride?
I'm gonna stand by the side because I'm an old man whose body hurts all the time.
I'm gonna ride because I'm 23 and don't know any better.
And of course, the park was slightly busier than it had been on my last trip, which meant that I was stuck standing in line for about 30 minutes without my phone or glasses because I had given them to Dave because I didn't want to have to pay for a locker. And that was easily by far my least favorite ride on X. Mainly because at the end my legs kept getting slammed into the seat, which, ow. Again, better padding and restraints would do absolute wonders for this ride. So overall, what do I think of Magic Mountain? Well, to put it simply, the park is kind of a hot mess. It's got an incredible collection of coasters, and yet several of them cancel each other out. There's parts of it that are absolutely breathtaking and dreamlike, and then there's other parts that are literally built on a former part of the parking lot. Their 2 tallest coasters don't even come close to living up to their stats. And their operations are generally pretty terrible unless they're literally forced to not be. So what kind of things would I fix? Well, for starters, for the love of God, the entry gates are terrible. It looks like you're walking into a prison. Look at Cedar Point. Look at Carowinds and Hershey Park. They've all spruced up their entrances recently and made them look really nice. I know they're kind of in a tricky spot because the water park entrance is right there, but how the water park be included in that? I don't know. I went on a Tuesday in September and a Monday in March. Tuesday in September, I would say things were mostly fine for the amount of people that were in the park. We more or less had the park to ourselves. But on that Monday, it was a little bit more crowded. Not to the point where, you know, if it was post-COVID, for example, we'd still be able to keep distanced. But there were enough people that there were lines for rides like Twisted Colossus, Apocalypse, West Coast Racers, and X2. And to that point, run multiple trains on those rides that are more popular. Especially with X2, where the load and unload process takes so much time, even if you only just ran the 2 trains, it would make a world of difference. Obviously, West Coast Racers is exempt from this criticism because they're literally forced to run, I think, like 4 trains at a time. Oh, speaking of which, having another dueling coaster is not an excuse to not have Twisted Colossus duel. Come on, guys. You paid Alan Schilke to design this incredible dueling coaster for you, and then you just decided, it's too hard, we'll just buy a new one. Disgraceful. Convert Riddler's Revenge to a floorless coaster already. Give Scream to a park that actually needs it. Like LaRonde.
Look, we're weightless. Me and my coaster riding banana.
Magic Mountain actually opened with more transportation rides than roller coasters. That quickly changed. But in all seriousness, one of the biggest things you could do to improve the park is give it some cross-park transportation again. It gets hot in Santa Clarita, and walking around that park up and down hill all day is exhausting. That's why I think they should build a Skyliner, similar to what Walt Disney World has. The only difference would be this one would just be inside one park. It's quiet, it's efficient, it can give guests great views, it can have multiple stops, and it can give guests a break from having to walk around and ride all these intense roller coasters all day. I don't know if this one's actually possible, but hey, I can dream. Give Goliath a better, steeper drop, more airtime moments, less of the Twister stuff. Heck, if you want to still have the Twister stuff, fine, but just put it at the end where it belongs. Of course, I'd also be down to see Goliath get replaced with an actual Giga Coaster, but I don't see Magic Mountain doing that, so... This one seems like an absolute no-brainer to me, especially since Six Flags has really liked working with SNS recently. You'd have a huge sit-down looping coaster, it would be smooth, it would be fast, it would be intense. They could totally go for an inversion record with this one too, either the US record or the all-around record. Oh my god, stop it with the Impractical Jokers ads in the Goliath queue and on the train, good lord! Remember when I said at the beginning of this video that my first trip to Magic Mountain was when I was like 7, and I was only able to get on about half of the rides? Well, that hasn't really changed. Even when they've added some more tame coasters like West Coast Racers, that ride still has a 54-inch height requirement. Their Mine Train, Gold Rusher, has a height requirement of 48 inches, which, well, come to think of it, makes about as much sense as Jaguar's 48-inch height requirement. So basically, if you have a kid that's under 48 inches, Magic Mountain probably is not the right park for you. Might I suggest Disneyland, or...
Take your kids to Nuts, or never see their faces again.
And that's really the crux of why I vastly prefer Disneyland and Knott's Berry Farm, and even parks like SeaWorld and Busch Gardens to Magic Mountain. Knott's Berry Farm especially is often thought of as the middle ground between Disneyland and Magic Mountain, and they do a great job of catering to everyone, and there's much more of a graduated step up between Timberline Twister and Hang Time. And it's not like you leave Camp Snoopy and there's nothing for your younger kids to do. There's still plenty of fun things for them to do. There's a train that they can ride that goes around the whole park. There's some carnival flats with a low height requirement. There's an actual working ghost town. Now, Magic Mountain and Knott's are the only Six Flags and Cedar Fair parks I've been to, respectively, and some of them will have a better balance than others, but it feels like Magic Mountain has tried so hard for so long to one-up Cedar Point with stat-stuffing, record-breaking thrill coasters that they fail to realize that most other parks try much harder to appeal to everyone. Even those boring people who maybe don't find the idea of plummeting 200 feet face-first towards the ground fun. And nowadays they fancy themselves the discount chain where you can go for some cheap thrills. So, do I recommend visiting Magic Mountain if you happen to be in California? Well, if you're visiting Disneyland and Knott's Berry Farm, it can be a bit of a drive to get there, but if you really like roller coasters, yeah, absolutely it's worth the trip. They've got North America's only true 4th dimension coaster. I'm sorry, the free spin stuff doesn't count. They've got one of the largest loops in the world. They have Twisted Colossus and West Coast Racers and Tatsu. All of those are definitely worth checking out. It's one of those bucket list parks that every coaster fanatic needs to get to at least once in their life. But if you don't like roller coasters, yeah, it's not really going to be a fun park for you to visit. There's not a whole lot else there to do. I'm definitely glad that I went, but I'm not itching to go back there like I am Knott's Berry Farm or Disneyland. Even if they do get that Raptor coaster, I could still go to New Jersey and ride it there if it's the same model. Basically, they'd have to get something really incredible to make me want to go back there within the next 5 or 10 years. They may have the most coasters in a single amusement park, but I'd take quality over quantity any day. So what do you think? What are your thoughts on Magic Mountain and the Six Flags parks in general? What kind of changes would you make if you were in charge? Let me know down in the comments below. I'd love to get a discussion going. If you like this video, be sure to like and subscribe. That really helps me against the YouTube algorithm and lets me know if you want to see more videos like this. Also, be sure to check out my weekly podcast, The Podcast Without a Cool Acronym, which is all about Disney television animation. Thanks for watching and stay sane, everyone.